Good morning, everybody. Our opening words this morning were compiled from the writings of Concord's great muse, Henry David Thoreau. Live in each season as it passes. Breathe the air, drink the drink, taste the fruit, and resign yourself to the influence of the earth. If the day and the night are such that you greet them with joy, and life emits a fragrance like flowers and sweet-scented herbs, that is your success. All nature is your congratulation, and you have cause momentarily to bless yourself. Heaven is under our feet as well as over our heads. We need the tonic of wildness. At the same time that we are earnest to explore and learn all things, we require that all things be mysterious and unexplorable, that land and sea be indefinitely wild, unsurveyed and unfathomed by us. We can never have enough of nature. In wildness is the preservation of the world. The words of Henry David Thoreau. Friends, please rise in body or spirit now and join in singing hymn number 1064 in the Teal book, Blue Boat Home. Though below me I feel no motion, standing on these mountains and plains, far away from the
And we join in the words of our unison affirmation. Love is the spirit of this church, and service is its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. El amor es el espíritu de esta iglesia, y el servicio es su ley. Este es nuestro gran pacto, vivir juntos en paz, buscar la verdad en el amor y ayudarnos los unos a los otros. So be it. And again, good morning. Good morning. Do it again, good morning. Good morning. Welcome. Welcome, everyone. Welcome if you're here for the very first time. Welcome if you have been here forever. If you're here new and want to stay in touch, there are blue connection cards in our pews, and I especially welcome our special guest preacher, Jim Antal, the Reverend Jim Antal, who is a public theologian, United Church of Christ pastor, and one of the leading environmental climate activists that we know. You know, a number of years ago, we had some difficulties with our sound system. And for whatever reason, the frequencies between our church and the First Church of Christ down the street got crossed. And in the middle of the sermon, the preaching of the Reverend Jamie Howard were broadcast through our speakers. It was sort of radio-free UCC. And I thought maybe we could reverse that this morning because we've got a genuine UCC preacher with us today. Jim and I first met in jail. We were part, like many of you, the protests of the West Roxbury Lateral Pipeline. We were next to the trench where the pipeline was to go, and I was in my full 18th century floppy hat, frock coat, buckle shoes. I was shouting something about no gasification without representation. And so when Jim and I and a number of other clergy went to jail together, I particularly remember our singing in jail. There was a Buddhist Dharma teacher named John Bell who led us in singing Blue Skies. Blue skies smiling at me, nothing but blue skies do I see. And, you know, with the concrete, the acoustics in that jail were wonderful. After the service today, there will be a talk back with Jim upstairs in the room overlooking the town common, the room we call the Bacon Room. A couple of other announcements. There's no parish council today. That's been postponed, but there's plenty of other stuff. There is our annual Quiche and Tell event for newcomers, and if you'd like to meet some parishioners and get to know other newcomers, you're welcome to participate in that. And with that, you know, I have been asking those who have been thinking about becoming members here to sign our membership book. We report these things to our denomination in early February, so this is your big chance. And I tell you that really, if you become a member, you're not going to be asked to do anything that we haven't already asked you. You know, we're going to ask you to give money, to volunteer, to make coffee, to teach RE, whether or not you're a member. Signing the book simply says that you're on this team and working toward better lives for each of us and a better world. Recall last Sunday I quoted Bill McKibben saying, "What is the most important thing an individual can do to change the world?" McKibben said, "Stop being an individual." And that is what membership is about, and that's what solidarity with the work that we're doing is all about. There also is an announcement in the order of service recruiting teachers for our religious education program, and if you read that announcement, that may explain why I may be walking out of a service in the near future. So that if you're wondering why I might be walking out of a service, read that and it will tell you why. I want to acknowledge a few people. Thank you particularly to Corinne Dowd, to our Environmental Justice Committee, to our Peace and Justice Committee, and our Social Responsibility Council for helping to bring Jim with us today. And I'm going to ask members of all those groups to please stand and stay standing, or raise your hand, that's just fine. And also, while I'm at it, we did postcards to our legislators advocating for climate justice work last Sunday. If you signed one of those postcards, would you also please stand? And if you are going to sign postcards today because they're going to be available, I would also like you to stand. And I now want us to acknowledge in gratitude everybody here. And I did that in part just to show Jim that we read the darn book, because he recommended that kind of liturgical recognition, and we may be doing that kind of thing more and more. I'm coming to the close of these things. Next Sunday, I will be preaching, and then the following Sunday, the 9th of February, we're going to have a one-person show of Thurgood, about the life of Thurgood Marshall, and that will be the entirety of our service. Do you remember last year we had a one-person show of the life of Dietrich Bonhoeffer, and it'll be like that. We're going to clear the decks for Thurgood, and older kids are going to be encouraged to be a part of this, and younger kids may not be. But it'll be a special Sunday, and you might start talking that up with your friends as well. And welcome, everyone. It's great to be together. It's great for me to see faces that I don't usually see here, and we are stronger when we are here together, and thank you for being here. And now for our time for all ages, the Reverend Annie Gonzalez Milliken.
So, once upon a time, an 11-year-old girl went to school, and in school, her teacher showed a video, and the video was about something that we call climate change. Now, who here knows what climate change is? I think most of us know what climate change is. Some of the very littlest ones might not know. What it means is that the weather is changing a lot on our Earth, and it's because of the way that human beings have been using fuel, things that make energy, like oil and gas and coal. Well, this girl was very upset because she didn't understand how no one had told her what was going on with the world. And she didn't understand how the grown-ups in her life were acting like everything was normal and okay. And she got so upset that she got really sick. And she didn't talk, and she didn't eat, and her parents got really worried about her, and they wanted her to get better. And one of the ways they decided to help her get better was to stop acting like living the way they were living was normal and okay. And so they made a lot of changes to how they were living so that they would use less energy. And her mom was a pretty famous singer, and she would travel all over the world to sing in concerts. And she stopped doing that. She stopped flying on airplanes because airplanes use a lot of energy. And this girl did start to get better, and she started eating and talking again and getting healthy again. And when she was in 9th grade, she decided she would take some actions too. And so she decided she was going to skip school once a week and sit with a sign saying, if you don't care about my future, then I'm not going to care about it either. And pretty soon, some other kids started getting involved. And pretty soon, a lot of kids started getting involved. Now, did anybody go to the climate strike that was in Boston or Lexington in September? Did anybody go to that? Yeah, a lot of us did. And that was amazing. If you went to the one in Boston, I'm sure the Lexington one was cool too. I wasn't at that one, but the Boston one, man, it was huge. It was wild. And so that all came from this girl. And you probably know that now I'm talking about Greta Thunberg, the Swedish youth climate activist. And I wanted to tell the part about the story about when she was 11 because I think it's really important. Because, you know, it's pretty easy for me to act like the way I live is normal. It's what I see all around me. I drive from Boston to Bedford 4 to 5 times a week. And I think, well, yeah, that's normal. I have a job, and I have a car, and I have to go, and that's what everybody does. And the thing is, Greta has a thing called Asperger's syndrome. And it means that her brain can focus really, really well on certain specific topics, and it can see patterns really clearly. And her brain is not quite as good at things like social things, interacting with people, and feelings. It doesn't always do quite as well with feelings. And so a big part of why she got so upset when she learned about climate change is because of how her brain works, right? She didn't really have that much of a choice. It was like she knew it was happening, and once she knew, she got really focused on it. But a lot of us, maybe our brains don't work that way. A lot of us might have a little bit more of a choice, and we might be a lot better at pretending like things are okay and normal, right? And that's actually really important because we don't all want to get really sick, and we don't all want to get so sad that we stop eating and stop talking, because that's not going to help anybody. That's not going to help. So we don't want to get stuck there, right? But we also don't want to be the grown-ups who are totally pretending like things are fine, right? We have to figure out how we can be a little of both. How we can be people who realize that the way we live is not okay, and also people who feel okay enough to do our things we gotta do. Go to school, go to work, go to church, be in the world. And that's pretty tricky. It's pretty hard to do both of those things. I find it really hard. And that's one of the reasons I think church is so important. Because when I'm with other people like you who know that we can't act like everything going on in the world is okay, and who know it's not going to do any good to just be totally sad and give up, then it helps me to be in the middle too. It helps me to take actions that will help. And it helps me to go out and see other people who are taking action too. And so I hope we can remember from this amazing young woman, this extraordinary leader, I hope that when we think about her story, we can remember that if we do have a choice about how upset we get or how much we ignore big problems, that we can try to do a little of both, and we can try to take actions with her and with others to make things better. So with that, we're going to send the kids off to their Sunday school classes. And just like Greta is someone who spoke out, we're going to use our voices to sing, if you want to sing out, to get the kids on their way to their programs.
I want to add 2 readings to what we heard from Thoreau and also to the readings from Gus Beth and Lynn White that are at the top of your bulletin. The first is just one verse from one of the 150 Psalms. This one, Psalm 24, familiar to all, I am sure. The earth is the Lord's and all that is in it, the world and those who live in it. The second set of verses comes from Paul's second letter to the Corinthians, and it requires a brief introduction. While the Apostle Paul was the founder of the church in the pagan city of Corinth, they persistently questioned his authority. You can almost hear the whisper campaign. I wonder if he made it all up, all that stuff about Jesus on the road to Damascus. Maybe he came up with this since Paul never actually met Jesus when he was alive. What gives him the right to tell us what to do? Let's demand that he prove his authority to us. Let's make him bring to us a letter from Peter or from James, the brother of Jesus. How else can we believe him? But Paul doesn't take the bait. Instead, he turns it around and he says to them, you are my letter of recommendation. You are the best evidence there is that my ministry has not been in vain. So listen now to this word from Paul's second letter to the Christians in Corinth, beginning with chapter 3, verse 1. Are we beginning to commend ourselves again? Surely we do not need, as some do, letters of recommendation to you or from you, do we? You yourselves are our letter, written on our hearts, to be known and read by all. And you show that you are a letter of Christ, prepared by us, written not with ink, but with the Spirit of the living God, not on tablets of stone, but on tablets of human hearts. Such is the confidence we have through Christ toward God, not that we are competent of ourselves to claim anything as coming from us. Our competence is from God, who has made us competent to be ministers of a new covenant, not of letter, but of spirit. For the letter kills, and the Spirit gives life.
I'm not sure that I'm getting this exactly right because I'm doing it from memory, but these are more or less the words of Bonaro Overstreet. You say the little efforts that I make will do no good. They never will tip the hovering scale where justice hangs in balance. I never thought they would, but I am prejudiced beyond debate that we may feel the stubborn ounces of my fate. Yeah, it applies to our offering. What we do will never be enough. And it applies to justice work because it goes on and on as well. And yet, may we feel the stubborn ounces of our weight. Freely we have received, freely give. Our morning's offering will now gratefully be received.
Grace and peace to you in the name of our still speaking God, who loves us just the way we are and loves us too much to let us stay that way. I want to thank John and also Corinne for reaching out to me and for inviting me to join your congregation. I can't tell you how impressed I have been already this morning, particularly by the way you asked the folks to stand up and bear witness to the testimony that you are making in your daily lives throughout this region in regard to the greatest crisis humanity has ever faced. We also heard an incredible children's message for all ages from Annie. The way she told that story about Greta it's just how I think of her I preach about her every time. You'll hear more quotes from her in this sermon. I was so grateful for that. And when I'm done talking, we're going to join our voices in a song, "The Tide is Rising," written by a rabbi friend of John's and mine with whom we were arrested back in 2016. And I will text her while we are singing. If you see me pull out my phone, I will be texting Shoshana that we are in the midst of singing her song. So love is the most powerful force on earth. I hardly need to tell you that. It's the lead message of your congregation's covenant. Motivated by love, each of us can make profound, fundamental changes in what we do with the one precious life we have been given. Love can drive us to redirect how we use our assets. Love can inspire us to take up a new vocation. Love can overcome authoritarian regimes and topple dictators. Persistent, unrelenting love can transform the economics of a family, a town, or a country. Today, I'm asking you to fall in love with a world that is dying. I'm asking you to face your feelings of pain and grief and use them as a gateway to action. I'm asking you to open your heart to a love so alive and active that it can drive out despair. What does faithfulness look like? As we are living amidst the sixth great extinction, faithfulness looks like love. Falling in love with a world that is dying and repurposing our lives in order to rebuild our home, not on life-canceling tar sands, but on life-promoting, zero-emission, renewable energy. Millions of young people in every country are showing the world what love looks like, and they are birthing a new world. Inspired by now 17-year-old Greta Thunberg, they have done what God is calling each one of us to do. They have accepted the science, they have harnessed their resources, and they have repurposed their lives. The youth are leading because they have known nothing other than a climate crisis all their lives. They recognize that the planet is broken and it's the only one we've got. These youth are leading because they'll accept no substitute for a livable world. These youth are leading because they realize that this isn't someone else's problem. As frequently as they say anything, they say what happens next to us is up to us. And these youth are leading because, like all true leaders, they offer hope. But it's not what most of us understand as hope. These young people affiliated with groups like the Sunrise Movement and the Extinction Rebellion, these young people understand hope as engagement. For them, hope has no connection with optimism. They realize they cannot control the menacing juggernaut of the climate crisis. For them, hope is not focused on some future state of affairs. Hope is manifest right now by walking out of school or out of work and into the street with millions of others in the biggest protest the world has ever seen. Hope is manifest right now by refusing to be paralyzed by despair, by no longer eating meat, by choosing not to fly. There's an article in today's Boston Globe about that, by the way. By confronting those in charge, by insisting that their universities divest from fossil fuel corporations, by cutting up their Chase Bank credit cards, or dumping their checking account in Wells Fargo because they fund the fossil fuel industry, by suing state and federal governments for failing to assure an inhabitable planet. You and I have been given the gift of life at the most critical moment in the millions of years humans have walked on the earth. Living as we are in the hinge of history, it falls to our generation to determine the fate of the earth and all of its inhabitants. This is not hyperbole. The religious leaders of a quarter of the world's population agree. I've heard it from the lips of the Orthodox Patriarch Bartholomew. And Pope Francis has twice convened the corporate executives of ExxonMobil, BP, and other fossil fuel companies to hear from his lips that humanity is facing a challenge of epochal proportions, and that it's their responsibility as corporate leaders to embrace this immense opportunity for a rapid transition to clean and renewable energy. Last week, when those same executives gathered with the world's richest people in Davos, for the second year in a row, they were treated to an even more pointed message. Here is what Time magazine's Person of the Year, Greta Thunberg, told them. We must change almost everything in our current societies. The bigger your carbon footprint, the bigger your moral duty. The bigger your platform, the bigger your responsibility. I don't want your hope. I want you to feel the fear I feel every day, and then I want you to act as if you were in a crisis. I want you to act as if your house were on fire, because it is. Now, if you think Greta is a little over the top, listen to what the climate scientists are saying. The 5 hottest years on record are the past 5 years. Since 1950, the number of floods across the world has increased 15 times. Extreme temperature events, 20 times. And wildfires, at least 7-fold. Our oceans are warming at a rate almost half again as fast as we thought only 5 years ago. A quarter of the world's population are one drought away from running out of potable water. The Greenland ice sheet is now melting 7 times faster than it was in the 1990s. 70% of our CO2 emissions come from the richest 20% of the people in the world. And the ways our current leaders of the federal government are wrecking God's creation are simply too numerous to mention. Because we are living in an age of loss disguised as plenty, it's difficult to face our current reality. And yet more and more people are paying attention. 80% of Americans now accept that human activity is making the planet warmer. So what does faithfulness look like in a climate crisis world? It looks like a climate strike organized by kids from over 185 countries that drew over 7 million people into the streets of over 6,100 cities and towns, calling for climate action now. I want you all to circle on your calendar, April 22nd. That will be the next worldwide climate strike. It's the 50th anniversary of Earth Day. Faithfulness looks like the people in Ethiopia planting over 350 million trees in 12 hours. Faithfulness looks like 9 states and hundreds of cities committing to transition to 100% renewable energy. Faithfulness looks like ordinary people like you and me talking to our family, our friends, and our coworkers every day about the climate crisis. If it's the greatest moral challenge humanity has ever faced, how could we not do that? Faithfulness looks like churches hosting community conversations, as you have done. And let's not stop there. Faithfulness sounds like people of faith recognizing that as we move from an age of loss to a time of consequences, we are not choiceless nor are we powerless. And faithfulness sounds like my denomination, the United Church of Christ, and your denomination, the Unitarian Universalist Association, becoming the first religious bodies to declare support for the Green New Deal. Yes, it will take a lot to get ExxonMobil, Shell, and the other fossil fuel companies to forego anticipated revenues of $33 trillion over the next 25 years. But in the 6 years since the National UCC Synod became the first national body and the first religious body in America to vote to divest from fossil fuel stocks, investments worth over $12 trillion have purged their portfolios of their holdings of fossil fuel stocks. Bill McKibben is right when he says money is the oxygen on which the fire of global warming burns. And the divestment movement is beginning to cut off that oxygen supply. Yes, it will take a lot to end America's addiction to oil, as George Bush put it. But since I was arrested in front of the White House with 1,253 others in 2011, the Keystone XL pipeline has yet to be built, and we have already prevented well over 2 billion barrels of the dirtiest crude oil from being extracted and burned. It's up to us, we who have been given this precious moment, we who now face an unprecedented crossroads, we who are living amidst unconscionable vulnerability. It's up to us. While physics and chemistry are telling us that the arc of the universe is bending toward extinction, our generation still has the power to bend the moral arc of the universe toward justice as we revive creation. Expressing our faithfulness in July 2017, 1 month after our president pulled the United States out of the Paris Climate Accord, 97% of UCC national delegates from all over the country voted to accept a resolution I wrote that said clergy need to preach on climate change, and we have a moral imperative to resist all expansion of fossil fuel infrastructure. For example, the pipeline that John and I were resisting, and many of you joined in, or the Weymouth compressor. Now let's be clear. While 97% of the people in my denomination say their religious beliefs compel them to address climate change, only 13% of Americans consider climate change a religious issue. That's why I read that first reading from Psalm 24. The earth is the Lord's, and only 13% of religious people think climate change is a religious issue. So when people ask me, what is God doing amidst the climate crisis? I respond like this. Amidst the climate emergency, with creation on the brink of destruction, God is doing what God always does in response to human crises and emergencies. God is calling people into action. God is extending to each of us a fresh invitation to harness all our gifts and blessings in service of rejecting the status quo, changing the system, imagining and thereby creating a new future, a future in which each one of us decides to accept God's invitation to change the course of history, a future in which you are the answer to the climate crisis, you along with everyone else who is alive today. Together, we need to live our lives as people who welcome the opportunity our generation has been given to determine what life will be like for tens of thousands of years to come. The importance of the witness God is calling us to make could not be more obvious. Perhaps that's why for several years I've been signing my emails sharing the yoke of Defiant Hope. Defiant Hope believes that we're called by God to envision new possibilities and act on them as if they were inevitable, and that God has given us everything we need to engage. Let's remind ourselves of what we're actually capable of. If in 1939, FDR had gone to Edsel Ford and said, Edsel, I'd like you to build the largest manufacturing complex in the world, and I'd like you to finish it in the next 6 months. And in that plant, I'd like you to make something you've never made before. Not a car, but something you've never made before. Actually, something maybe with over 1 million parts. Etzel, do you think you could do that for me? Etzel Ford would have said to FDR, Mr. President, you are out of your mind. But when FDR said it to Etzel Ford in 1941, everything had changed. And 6 months later, the Willow Run manufacturing complex was completed, and every 24 hours it was churning out a B-24 Liberation bomber. And each of those bombers had 1.2 million parts. So you see what I mean when I say we can do this? Could you say that with me? We can do this. But to do this every day, each one of us, we need to do two things. We need to face the challenge, and we need to join with others to take some action. And one thing more, Defiant Hope inoculates us against the epidemic of despair that so often accompanies the release of the newest climate science, or the shock when a government official denies it. But this reality is not the final word, because the future is not yet written. And if any government official denies science, or deletes climate data, or forbids the sharing of ongoing scientific investigation, or supports policies that will rob our children of their future, none of this is the final word, because the future is not yet written. Can you say that with me? The future is not yet written. And remember, God has given us everything we need to engage. And while God doesn't promise success, God promises unswerving support as we engage our calling. This is how we write the future. This is how we shape history, by envisioning new possibilities and acting on them as if they were inevitable. And all the while remembering Gandhi's wise counsel. First they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, and then you win. Now let's be clear, Gandhi doesn't offer a timeline. And many of us may not live to see the fruits of our action to protect God's creation. But we know that our courageous moral witness will inspire others to take action and to receive the power of the Holy Spirit as they do. And that brings me to today's epistle reading. Just as Paul declares to the Christians in Corinth, so I say to you, you are my letter. And so I say to you, in all of your endeavors, let your life be a sign of defiant hope, rooted in love, immersed in gratitude, infused with joy, propelled by wonder, and always seeking truth, because the truth will set you free, free to make full use of your gifts and capacities in partnership with others, and guided by the Holy Spirit to protect God's great gift of creation. Amen.
So, thank you so much for that message. And as Reverend Antal said, we're going to be singing "The Tide is Rising," written by Shoshana Friedman, a local rabbi. And it's a pretty simple song, and many of you may know it. So join right in. I'm going to sing it through one time on "The Tide is Rising," and then after that, we'll go one more time on "The Tide is Rising," and then we'll start inserting the other words you can see in your order of service. So if you know it well, join in on the first round, and if you don't, you'll have plenty of time to catch on, so don't worry about it. Oh, yes, and stand up. Thank you, Brad. Good point. Everybody up. The tide is rising, and so are we. The tide is rising, and so are we. The tide is rising, and so are we. This is where we are called to be. This is where we are called to be. The tide is rising.
every church, every denomination does this closing thing a little differently, right? So I don't know what your habit is, but I know what I want to say to you, and I began saying it at the beginning of my sermon. You have something really important and really good going on here, and there are thousands of people within 2 miles of this congregation who need it and who want it and can't imagine. They cannot imagine that a gathering like this happens every week. So this book up here, that John suggested, you know what, we're gonna involve you in this congregation, whether or not you sign the book. I don't care if you sign the book either, but you know what I do care? I do care that you do something that no New Englander wants to do. You know where I'm going. It's to talk about your faith to someone else, right? So I was in Massachusetts for 22 years as a minister. I get this, but I'm here to tell you the world is at stake, and people of faith can make a difference, whether they are in the pews or not. But you know what? As Bill McKibben says, and as your minister quoted, that we need to stop being individuals, and that's what you do here every single Sunday. So bring others in. They need to not be individuals with you. Amen.